So what we're going to talk about right now is this organization is called Every Black Life Matters. And we have our president and we have our VP here of the organization. And I wear many hats. They call me the boss. So I like that. First, what I want to do is raise your hand if you know what wokeism means. Raise your hand high if you know what wokeism is. Okay, I need 3 people, 4 people. Okay. I can do the brief history. Okay, so let me just do the brief history and then I'm going to hand it off to these gentlemen and we'll have some dialogue about wokeism. And what will happen is after this, we're going to have a panel on international views on what's happening with wokeism, where we'll bring some of our honored guests back up on the platform to have this discussion with us. And I think that's Dr. Hannah, Dr. Jane, Dr. Brian, for the international conversation on woke. I have to look at my notes, but I know Dr. Brian definitely. So, wokeism is, let me start back with Black America and the Civil Rights Movement. We're all familiar with that?
Yes.
Right, when we were fighting from slavery?
Yes.
Okay. So what happened is we began to organize in a way that we were telling the government that they had violated our unalienable rights, which Neil so wonderfully explained to us. In that process, we began to build alliances. We began to influence the hearts of people in that they needed to change the policies to make slavery not only just illegal, which had been done, but still we were not treated as equals. And even there were times for Jews as well, where they could not drink at the same water fountain. So it wasn't just, at the time African Americans, there were other groups of people who could not drink water from the same water fountain, who could not eat a meal at the same counter or enter this door the same as white people. We had to use the back entrance. And we were born and raised in America, but we did not have those rights. So then, what happened is we began to gain momentum, policies began to change, politics got involved, and there was a great shift in what became the Civil Rights Movement. While this is going on, there are a group of people who knows, raise your hand if you've heard of the LGBTQ community, right? You know what the lesbian, gay, homosexual movement is, they call it, and transgender and queer, right? LGBTQ.
I plus.
I plus, thank you. There's a whole bunch of letters. What happened while they were watching this is they realized that they wanted their rights as well. They wanted the right to marry, they wanted the right to have children, they wanted to be recognized, and they were watching the way that Black America was changing the heart of a nation. But they took it one step further. As they were paying attention, what they did is they began to make sure that they got involved in politics. We did to a certain degree, but we were very much tied to the church, very much involved in that, and that was a very strong part of our movement. But we didn't get involved in politics as much. But the LGBTQ community was watching, and they took it a next step further. And so by the time we're now at this place where everything is kind of okay, they are now marching, and they're saying, well, we want our civil rights. You did it for the Black people, you can do it for us. And as the church community, as the faith community, they would come to us and say, we just want to be able to have the freedom to love whoever we want. And what the faith community did was compromise. And we said, well, you know what? Whatever you do in your house, it's okay. Just don't do it out in public. And you should. You have the freedom, right? It's you can love who you want. Well, what we did was we opened the door just a little bit. And once they got that, then they said, well, now we want this right. And now you need to acknowledge this right. And because they had begun to put people in places in politics, they were now setting legislative law, and they could push policy in such a way that they were getting the rights, and they were talking about them as being civil rights that were owed to them. And this is then where we now begin to have this idea of wokeism starting to come up, because we're saying they're taking over and they're saying you need to wake up, we need to have our rights, everybody needs to wake up, you need to be woke and realize that, I mean, they're gonna clean up my language here because they know it much better than me, but what is gonna happen is they began to co-opt the whole conversation about rights and humanity. And now everything that as morally we would oppose to them, they would cancel it. They would say that it's wrong. They would say that you don't understand us. And so this whole idea of wokeism came because now what's happening is wokeism is even moving into transgender and women, men thinking they have the right to be a woman. And they're erasing the word woman from the dictionary in America. And they're setting legislation that is teaching sex education and many of those things in our kindergarten schools. And so we're here to talk to you and say we're here from the future to tell you to say no, right? Don't let these policies enter your country. For some countries, you're already on that slide towards being progressive, but you still have an opportunity to make that change. And so we're coming from the future. We want you to see how badly it has hurt Black America, how badly it has hurt the church. Because you won't see that on CNN and MSNBC and major news networks. But we're here to tell you those policies will harm you. So I'm going to give it over to Kevin to kind of lay some foundation and Neil to add, and then I'll come back to them with questions to help you understand what we do, what's the move against wokeism, and then how you can participate.
All right. Well, that was excellent, Regina. You know exactly how to do it. So yeah, as Regina said, it started with, hey, we as this other community, we want to use the same tools that the civil rights movement used. We're just another special interest group. We want to be treated the same. Give us our civil rights. Then it moved to, well, we just want your tolerance. And then it moved to now they're very aggressive, hateful, and violent to anyone that would disagree with their position. So, when they were asking for just tolerate us, we just want tolerance. It's okay. We just want to be able to love and this and that. Now they're completely intolerant. They're completely divisive. They're completely oppressive. They're everything else. But wokeism as a term, it infers that you're awake, as Regina was saying. And you're awake to insensitivities. You're awake to oppressive ideas, to the oppressors. You're awake to the victimizers. You're awake to the colonization. You're awake to the intolerance. And essentially, it is a playbook for Marxism. And when you start talking about the oppressor, victimizer, and colonizer, and those types of things, it takes on a whole different tenor. It takes on a Marxist, proletariat versus bourgeoisie.
Class.
Yeah. And so it's the same thing. It's just they have new terms for it. So bottom line is if you're woke, you would be one of these people that say, yeah, I'm woke. I'm good with everything that's going on. I see the insensitivity, I see the injustices of this group and that group being marginalized by the colonizers, the oppressors, the Christian nationalists, the white Christian nationalists. And really what's regrettable about that is a lot of black churches, traditional religions are participating in being woke. And that's really peculiar because it's completely antithetical. In other words, the Bible, you can't make the Bible comport with what that is, because that is completely antithetical to what the Bible says, okay? So if you look at wokeism like an umbrella, what falls under it would be DEI, CRT. DEI would be diversity, equity, inclusion. CRT is critical race theory or critical theories. So they got critical gender, critical queer theory, critical legal theory. They got all kinds of theories that are all Marxist. And then social justice would fall under that. So these are the kinds of things that you would need to accept if you're going to be woke. So, and like I said, the root of all of those things is Marxism. And it's inescapable, that's where it all comes from. It's just rooted there. And if you know anything about Karl Marx, you know anything about his mentor, Charles Darwin, you understand that these things are completely, holistically, unequivocally demonic. Inescapable demonic. There's no way you could say Marx had a little bit of, it was okay, it was right. No, pure demonism is what Marx was all about. So, and I can say more about that later, but, so that's what we're facing. You know, we're facing pure, unadulterated demonism versus, you know, righteousness. And so we at Every Black Life Matters, this is one of our things, we're standing at the tip of the spear in culture. And we're combating it wherever we see it, and we'll take on anybody on these critical subjects because we need to understand what's happening, and especially the body of Christ. So that's where we are, and that's how we position ourselves within the culture. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also important that we understand what these rights are that they're fighting for. Because you're saying, well, why don't they have the right? Well, anything that results in disease, death, or destruction in the long term is bad for you, and God's laws are against it. So the problem with the homosexual stance, oh yeah, we have the right to be gay. Well, you do if you want to do what you want, but what they want is they want the state to affirm their actions. And the state can't affirm their actions because the average homosexual dies between 18 to 20 years earlier just because of the lifestyle. The average transgender, after they do the transition, they are 200% more likely to commit suicide.
Yes.
Right? Before they do it, they're 20% more likely to commit suicide. After, sorry, not 200, 2,000% more likely to commit suicide. Between the year 10 and 19, the suicide rate goes up by 20 times. Not 20%, 20 times. It's actually bad for them. And not only that is they're convincing kids who are not even old enough to decide that they can drink, like 8-year-olds, that they should have their genitals removed and changed. And these are the problems you have. So anytime you see these, so people don't have a right to destroy themselves at the cost of, have society, society doesn't have a right to force people to destroy themselves, and that's what they really are doing. So they never had that right. I think it's very important that we understand that. Every single one of these issues, there are medical problems, there are physical problems, there are psychological problems with it in the long term. And that's why they don't have the right to do that. So I just want that to be clear. It's not that, oh, they're fighting for right, we're fighting for right. They're not the same things, they're completely different.
One of the other things that you'll see along with wokeism is, have you heard of BLM? Who's heard of BLM? Black Lives Matter. Okay, so in America, what was it, maybe 5 years ago?
Yeah, 2020.
2020. Okay, so they were a small organization that were fighting against police corruption and the fact that black young men were dying at the hands of police officers. It had nothing to do with whether the young man was a criminal or not. The point was that they were being killed, and the biggest one was Trayvon Martin back around 2020. 2013.
George Floyd.
Thank you. So 2013 was Trayvon Martin, George Floyd was 2020. And that was all over the news, globally, everywhere. You can Google it, where you're watching a young man die on videotape because a police officer was leaning on him so hard that kneeling on him so hard that he could not breathe. And while in custody, in public, that young black man died. That's horrible. We all agree that that's horrible, it's wrong, and the system needs to be fixed. But that ignited a whole change in thought because they had had enough. And I'm sure that in every one of your countries, every one of your communities, you are facing oppression, corruption, abuse in a way that you are close to a tipping point of it is enough. But if you are not the organization, if your community, your faith community, is not already at the place where you are active, where you are involved in politics, where you are organizing your community, do not wait until the tipping point to then decide that you want to do this. You need to act now as if the tipping point is now. Because we know how evil works. It doesn't create anything new. It cycles through and does the same thing in the same way. It just may be a different location. So we're here from the future to tell you, get ahead of this, because we did not in America. And what we had then was BLM, this Black Lives Matter organization, and it moved globally. Everyone was wearing BLM everywhere.
One of my favorites.
They were everywhere talking about the rights of the poor people. But what they would do when they would riot is they would go into the Black communities and riot. I understand that you're upset, but why go into your own community, tear up your local stores, set those cars on fire because you're trying to make a point? But you put people out of business. You destroy property.
The very same.
And so the motivation, the evil, as Kevin was talking about, is purely demonic. Why? Because when you create instability, then you show that there needs to be a change of policies in government, and we're going to bring in something that's going to be able to help you. We're going to speak to the poor people. And so they would create such a frenzy and such a movement that even the people in church, faith people, believed that they had no other option, nowhere else to go. So they linked arms with BLM. And so now we see the faith community coming into agreement with an organization that believed in abortion, an organization that believed that fathers should not be in the home, an organization that believed in Marxism, an organization that believed in transgenderism and LGBTQ rights, and were pushing that and supporting that. And what did they do? They got a lot of money. And you know that when you get a lot of money, then you can start changing things, you can start influencing things, you start marketing in a different way. And by the time the church actually awoke to it, it was too late. And now we're behind the wheel trying to get in front of it. And so we're saying to you from the future, not to let this happen. So some of the policies and important things I would ask to you, Kevin and Neil, what were some of the mistakes? What should have we done ahead of time, looking back now, right? That could have positioned the faith community where this never could have blown up to as big as it's gotten. You know, what were some of the things that we should have done, the mistakes you can see now, that man, if we had just turned right instead of left, we could be in a different place.
I thought you were going to start with Kevin. No, I'm smiling because you popped this question. I wasn't ready for it, so I was going to get
What could we have done different? I think that even with the Trayvon Martin in 2013, there was a lot of animus and all kinds of there wasn't as much writing, but there were definitely marches and those types of things that went along with that. And so it was just awaiting another opportunity to really blow up again. And it just so happens that George Floyd, well, there were a number of other smaller ones, but George Floyd, because it was so pronounced, 9 minutes and 43 or so seconds of video of this guy losing, life, leaving this man. It had a traumatic impact on a lot of people. So I think that what we could have done is we could have built better bridges with the law enforcement community and the Black community. We could have recognized that if we don't get a handle on this, all we need is another public brutality incident where our streets are going to erupt. I think that we could have or should have as well really tried to help all communities understand what Marxism is and what it's not, what social justice is and what it's not, what socialism is and what it's not. What is not is something that is benign and rightful. It sort of has a justice move to it. It is not that. It is always violent. It is, and this is Marx himself. Marx says, look, we need to, we'll do whatever, by any means necessary. We're going to turn over every existing hegemonic influence, every existing traditional thing within all these societies around the world. We're going to turn them upside down so we can position ourselves so that everybody be ready for a communist reset. And you see where we're going right now in that way. So, but the other thing is everybody needs to understand what Karl Marx said. He says, look, I care nothing about my economic philosophies. My number one goal in life is to dethrone God wherever he exists. This is Karl Marx. I want to dethrone God, is what this guy said. And we have churches that align behind Marxist ideas. Black liberation theology general, and all of this.
When you say churches are aligning with Marxism, give some specifics so that even in their church, they could be like, oh, that's Marxist and it's not something I should align with.
Yeah, so social justice, if you have a social justice pastor, you should go to him and say, Pastor, I'm looking at the Bible, I'm trying to figure out where social justice is. I don't see it. Can you explain it to me? What is social justice? These are things that are Marxist ideas. These are Marxist tropes that are symptomatic that we have a problem with our own theology. Either the cross is sufficient or it's not. And if it's not, we have another problem. Right? Is the cross sufficient? Now, if it's not, that's fine. Mr. Pastor, you need to sit down and get saved because you're saying the cross is not sufficient. Yeah. So what is it? You can't have it both ways. So, here's the thing. Social justice, right, is one of the things that they would say. Or if you see them talking about liberation theology, black liberation theology, James Cone, all of his theologies, which are theologies around social activism. If you have your pastor saying, look, we need to be activists in relation to our Bible. We need to have activism as part of it because we gotta make sure we educate, and goes up. The activism, social activism is something that's a problem. If they say, socialism is kind of okay. What Marx said is, look, I don't want anybody to be, you can't just stop at socialism. The goal is not socialism, the goal is communism. Socialism is there as an entry point, but he says if you do so, the next phase is communism. That's just the entry. So you cannot be a socialist and say, well, I'm not a commie. If you are a socialist, you are a commie, period. Art stop, end of story, according to the guy who created the theology. Yes. The ideology. So we need pastors to understand that, look, is the Bible sufficient? Mr. Pastor, Mr. Bishop, Mr. Prelate, Mr. Double Doctor, whatever. Is the Bible sufficient? I think every answer for how we get along in communities, how we appreciate one another as brothers and sisters. Mr. Pastor, do you need to read Ephesians 2:14 again? That talks about Jesus taking care of every barrier between male and female, between Jew and Gentile, and everything else. Mr. Pastor, do you believe what Galatians 3:28 says? Mr. Pastor, do you believe that the Bible, when Romans 8:1, when God says, look, therefore there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. How is it that we can condemn our brothers and sisters in the Lord? Oh, you white Christian nationalists, you voted for so-and-so, but excuse me? We're condemning one another. We're actually acting as accusers of the brethren with immaturity. We're doing Satan's work for him in the body of Christ. Does this make sense to you? Yes.
So we, as people of faith, we have to reject this. We have to know that our Bible is sufficient, that what Jesus did was more than enough, and that every answer to all of these social ills are in the Bible. Yes, we need reconciliation. I say it's not racial reconciliation. That was already done. Jesus has done it. Ephesians 2, you read the whole chapter, it's wonderful. We need biblical reconciliation. We need to be reconciled back to the Bible so we understand what it says. Does this make sense to you? So a lot of pastors don't read the Bible or something. Something's happening. Because they're easily swayed by culture. Now we have to understand that the global culture is demonic. It is. I wish it weren't.
Yes.
But we have a global culture now that's being led by the World Economic Forum and Council of Foreign Relations and the UN and the World Health Organization. These are globalist, communist, demonic entities. Okay? I wish it weren't true, but that's the way it is. And so when we have pastors, when we have people that are just going along with the flow, we need to have enough in us to say, no, that's not how we should be going, brother, sisters. A lot of us just don't have the understanding, and we need that now. This is the time. We cannot be passive anymore with the Bible and with culture. We must impact culture with the Bible and apply it appropriately. And so if we would have done that, if we now even begin to do that, we could stop it in some of these other great countries that want to maintain their traditions. No one in here would agree that a 5-year-old should be told that they're, look, Johnny, I think you may be another gender. Or another.
Yeah.
A 5-year-old. Now, if you told me when I was 5, look, I used to love Superman and Batman, right? If you had put a cape on me when I was 5 years old, put me on a roof up here, I would have flown off. Do you understand? A 5-year-old has no concept about gravity or anything else. So how is it then that you're going to tell a 5-year-old, of course he or she are going to be susceptible to these messages. These are innocent, the most innocent amongst us, and yet the body of Christ. Silent. We're letting it happen. The body of Christ in America, nothing. Nothing. There's no real rebuke. So it's an honor to be here. We're glad to be here because we want to be at the tip of the spear everywhere that these types of atrocities are existing. And right now they're coming after these communities because you haven't fallen in yet. So we're happy to have more conversations about with you about how you can forestall these types of things happening in your countries.
I would ask questions. Question.
Not yet, sir.
Well, we should. So I just wanted to add a couple things. Kevin covered it so well. 2 things. One, if a pastor says, you ask the question, where should the church get involved? Right at the beginning. When's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the next best time? Now, right? So when we should have gotten involved right at the beginning, and we didn't. But I want to mention 2 things. One, if the church doesn't get involved and your pastor says something to the effect of, well, I don't know, I just need to preach the gospel. This is your answer to him. Did you know that the gospel was preached for 200 years in 2 of the most Christian nations in the world, England and the United States, and yet slavery still continued every one of those 200 years? It wasn't until men of God got involved in politics that slavery was stopped. It is not enough to preach the gospel. You must fight for justice.
Yes.
So that's the first thing the pastor and the church has to do. The second thing the church has to do must realize that they need to be actively looking at all these issues all the time. They have to watch for it because the devil, the wolf, is at the gate. And we seem to have forgotten about the evil of man. And we're hiding in our churches. And what was the church supposed to do? The church is supposed to be at the gates of hell. By the way, the church is supposed to be at the gates of hell. Where are the gates of hell? The gates of hell are at hell, not at our church. That means we're on the attack. It's hell that's on the defense, not the church. We're supposed to be on the offense at the gates of hell. We're storming the gates of hell. We're taking over, and they're hiding in fear inside the gates. Thank you very much.
You. He's He's on fire. This is fire for him. We don't normally get to see all this. It must be Jerusalem. It must be. I think there could be some confusion, or I see uncertainty. When we talk about social justice and activism, and we say, okay, well, you shouldn't do it. And then Neil just said, well, you should be involved in politics, and you should be storming the gates. What's the difference?
So, I do a talk called The Difference Between Social Justice and True Justice. True justice is protecting people's rights. Freedom of speech, freedom of liberty, slavery was a true justice issue, right? It's protecting life, the right to life. That's true justice issue. Social justice is taking goods and giving it to people. That's good. Just look at any issue and say, is this a social justice or true justice, right? LGBTQ, they want special preferences that nobody else gets. They want free transgender surgery. They want this, they want that. Critical race theory, it's again violating other people's rights. So go down the list. Are you violating other people's rights? When you advocate for something, then that's a social justice issue, and it's unbiblical and it's evil. Are you advocating to protect life, protect God's laws, protect moral laws? Then it's a real true justice issue. And that's real easy. It's really easy. You can line them up down next to each other and say, is this protecting life, liberty, and long-term health? It's a true justice issue. Is this giving goods to people, giving special needs to people, giving special privileges to people? Social justice issue, and it's evil.
Okay, and we're going to transition soon into just bringing a few more people on stage, and then we will take some Q&A, sir. Also, what's important to understand is that when you talk about Marxism coming into the community and it's evil, it's not, sometimes they do wear a t-shirt that says, I'm a Marxist, right? Sometimes. But other times, they don't. And so it's to that point that Neil was talking about. When they say that somebody needs, when they say the government needs, thank you, when they say the government needs to give us this, or the government needs to do this for us, you may be saying, yeah, like, right, we need help. But that's a trick. Because as we've been speaking, and Neil's been teaching all afternoon, is we don't need the government to be more involved. What we need to do is find a solution within our communities. And so what happens is that there's some injustice. I think I read about farmers are being killed. Is that right, in South Africa? People are coming in and killing the farmers and taking their property, robbing them. So, how do you solve that problem? Is that a government needs to have more protection? Or is it something that the farmer and the property owner, that they need to do to be in right alignment to protect themselves? Where are they making themselves vulnerable? And so I was asking MD about it, and she said to me many times they hire people who are not legal citizens in the country, so they have no paperwork. So they can't be traced. So there's no attachment to the land. So it's easier for them to rob and steal from you, because who's going to find them? Who knows that they were there? So then what do? You need to follow the law. And so if you need to follow the law in order to protect yourself, to not be vulnerable, but then you say, well, the law, if I do this, I'm going to have to pay these extra taxes, I'm going to have all these other extra fees, the government needs to do something about it. And so then this is where we're saying, well, what can you do to make sure that you're changing the policies as far as Christians getting involved? But it's not that you need the government to come in or you need to pay more fees to your police officers. There are solutions, whether you make community policing. Do you guys do community policing?
Yes, yes.
Okay, there are ways within your community that you're going to have to come together, and maybe you need to talk with one another and say, okay, if I can't afford this person, maybe we can come together and hire a group legally so that we don't put ourselves at risk, right? So sometimes you think that choosing ways to bring in government or to find other ways that the government should help you bring you into the slide of more socialism and Marxist behavior. And you don't realize it because it doesn't look like that. You're just trying to protect yourselves. But you really have to stand back and say, who am I giving more power to? Am I empowering the landowner, or am I empowering government, and I'm looking for them to protect us more? Does that help, or did I confuse?
Yes.
Yes, no, like,
No, we're fine.
okay. Because when you start talking about these, and I see you thinking, so I'm not sure if I confused you or if you're actually, okay, if you're actually really thinking. What I want to do is we need 2 more chairs up here, Justin, and I believe Dr. Bryan and Professor Harrington, you were going to join us on the panel to have this international